The desperate call for help. 5 to 7 minute hook. The peaceful planet of Viridian was in chaos. It had once been a symbol of hope and prosperity in the galaxy, but now it was teetering on the brink of destruction. A massive alien force, led by the ruthless Uyghur, was advancing on the planet, determined to wipe out its population and seize control of its resources. The Viridionians, known for their intelligence and peaceful ways, had never experienced anything like this before. Their cities were being burned to the ground, and their fleets, though powerful, were no match for the sheer size and ferocity of the invading force. The Uyghur were a brutal race, known for their war tactics that left nothing but death and devastation in their wake. The Viridionians fought back, but their efforts were in vain. In the heart of their capital city, the Council of Elders gathered in a darkened chamber, fear and desperation filling the room. The planet's defenders had been destroyed one by one, and the people were fleeing into the mountains, seeking refuge wherever they could. The enemy's forces were getting closer and time was running out. "We cannot hold on much longer," said Elder Sar, his voice trembling. "The Uyghur will be here soon. If we don't act, Viridian will be lost forever." The council members exchanged nervous glances, knowing there was only one thing left to do. They had all heard the stories, the whispered legends about a race so powerful, so feared that even the galaxy's most dangerous enemies trembled at the thought of facing them. "The Deathworlders," Elder Sar said, his voice barely a whisper. "We must call them." The room fell silent. The very idea of reaching out to the Deathworlders was unthinkable. They were a race of warriors known for their brutality and merciless nature. No one in the galaxy dared to seek them out. But now, the Viridionians had no choice. They were on the edge of extinction, and the Deathworlders were their last hope. "We don't know if they will even respond," said Elder Kale, his voice filled with doubt. "They are legends, not a reality. If they even exist, we may never know." "There is no time to question," said Elder Nira, a woman of few words. "We either call them and take the chance, or we let our world fall into the hands of the Uyghur." "I vote for the call." With no other options, the council decided to send a message to the Deathworlders. It was a risky move, but it was the only move they had left. The message was simple. The Viridionians pleaded for help, explaining their dire situation and the devastation they were facing. They sent it out to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, hoping, praying that the Deathworlders would hear it. As the message went out, the council waited in tense silence. The planet's defenders continued to fight, but it was clear that the end was near. The Uyghur would soon arrive, and unless the Deathworlders answered, Viridian would fall. Hours passed, then days. The message had traveled across the stars, and there was no response. The council began to lose hope. Perhaps the Deathworlders truly were a myth, a story passed down through generations. They feared they had made a terrible mistake. But just as they were about to give up, something strange happened. A small, unmarked ship appeared in the skies above Viridian. The ship was unlike any the Viridionians had ever seen before. It was massive, a warship that seemed to be made from a single piece of dark metal, and it moved with terrifying speed. The council watched in shock as the ship entered the planet's atmosphere. It didn't land. Instead, it hovered over the city, sending out a pulse of energy that washed over the planet, causing the Uyghur ships in orbit to shake. The ship then sent a single message, one that would be forever etched into the minds of every Viridionian. "We are here." The Deathworlders had arrived. The arrival of the Deathworlders. The arrival of the Deathworlder ship above Viridian was a spectacle unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. As it hovered in the sky, its massive hull cast a shadow over the city, darkening the once bright streets. For a moment, the entire planet seemed to pause. Its inhabitants held their breath, unsure of what was to come. The Viridionians had sent their plea for help, but the sheer reality of the Deathworlders' presence was overwhelming. No one had ever truly believed the legends. They were stories told around fires, myths to keep children in line. But now, standing face to face with these ancient tales, the Viridionians were filled with a mixture of awe and terror. From the ship, a series of mechanical sounds echoed through the sky, the hum of its engines shaking the atmosphere. Suddenly, without warning, the ship fired a blast of energy down to the surface. It wasn't an attack. The blast hit the planet's atmosphere and then dispersed in every direction. It was as if the ship was sending a signal, and the entire world felt it. The Wyger fleet, which had been preparing to land, immediately stopped. Their ships seemed to tremble as if they were afraid. They had underestimated the power that had just arrived. The Deathworlders had made their move, and there was no turning back. On the ground, Elder Sar watched from the council chamber, his heart racing. The Viridionians had no idea what to expect. Would the Deathworlders be as brutal as the story said? Would they help, or had they come to destroy everything? The Elder could only hope that they had made the right choice. But just as fear began to settle in, a voice echoed from the skies. "This is the Deathworlder fleet. We have answered your call." The message, though simple, sent a shock through the entire planet. The Deathworlders had not only heard the plea but were willing to act. In an instant, the fear turned to hope. But it wasn't a simple hope. This was a hope built on something far more dangerous: power. The council members stood in silence as they tried to process the enormity of the situation. They had put their faith in the Deathworlders, and now they would see the result. It wasn't just the end of the Wyger threat they had to worry about. It was what the Deathworlders' arrival meant for Viridian. No one knew what these mysterious beings wanted in return for their help. While the council gathered their thoughts, the Deathworlders continued their descent. The immense ship hovered lower, just above the city. Its sleek, dark design was almost entirely black, with sharp edges and glowing red lights running along its sides. It looked more like a weapon than a ship, and it radiated an aura of pure destruction. From the ship, a smaller craft detached, moving silently through the air until it reached the ground. The people below watched in awe as the shuttle landed. When the doors opened, no one was prepared for what came out. The Deathworlders weren't what the Viridionians had expected. They weren't just warriors. They were giants. Their figures loomed over the people, their armor dark and intricate, covering their bodies from head to toe. Their weapons, which they carried effortlessly, were enormous, unlike anything the Viridionians had ever seen. They were built for war, designed to crush anything in their path. One of them stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. His voice echoed through the air, a deep, rumbling tone that sent chills down the spine of every Viridionian within earshot. "We are here to end this." With that, the Deathworlders moved into action. Their first target was the Wyger fleet, now caught off guard by the arrival of these formidable beings. The Viridionians watched in awe as the Deathworlders unleashed a devastating barrage of energy blasts, ripping through the Wyger ships with ease. The Viridionians had never seen anything like it. The Wyger, once so confident in their superiority, were now scrambling to defend themselves. The Deathworlders didn't hesitate. They didn't offer mercy. Every shot, every strike, was designed to obliterate. The Wyger fleet attempted to retaliate, but they were no match for the overwhelming power of the Deathworlders. The sky lit up with explosions as the Wyger ships were torn apart. In mere minutes, the once mighty fleet was reduced to rubble. The Deathworlders had made their mark, and the Viridionians could hardly believe their eyes. As the final Wyger ship was destroyed, the Deathworlders turned their attention back to the planet below. They were victorious, and yet their presence left an uneasy feeling in the air. The Viridionians had been saved, but at what cost? The council watched in stunned silence. They had been saved, but now they had to face the reality of their new relationship with the Deathworlders. Would this alliance last? Would they ever truly be free, or would the Deathworlders demand something in return for their help? The questions were endless, but one thing was certain: Viridian had been changed forever. This second part builds on the tension from the first, showing the immense power of the Deathworlders as they defeat the Wagera and save Viridian. The fear of the unknown is replaced with awe and admiration, but also suspicion and uncertainty about what might come next. The audience is left hanging, eager to see the consequences of this newfound alliance. The use of simple and accessible language ensures that the audience stays engaged, while the escalating action keeps them hooked. The price of victory. The sound of destruction echoed in the sky, a reminder of the Deathworlders' overwhelming power. The Wagera fleet had been obliterated in a matter of minutes, leaving nothing but debris in its wake. The planet of Viridian, once teetering on the brink of collapse, had been saved. Yet, amidst the chaos and celebration, something felt off. As the Deathworlders stood silent in their formation, surveying the damage they had caused, the Viridionians couldn't help but feel a growing unease. Their saviors had arrived, and with them, a power that no one had ever dreamed possible. But the question remained, why had the Deathworlders helped them? What did they want in return? Elder Sar watched the Deathworlders with a careful gaze, his mind racing. He had lived through wars, witnessed betrayals, and seen alliances fall apart. His people had asked for help, but now he realized that such a powerful intervention would come at a cost. Nothing was ever truly free, especially from beings as formidable as the Deathworlders. A small group of Viridionian officials approached the Deathworlders. Their leader, a tall figure with intricate armor and glowing eyes, stepped forward. He was different from the others, calmer, perhaps even wiser. His presence demanded attention, and when he spoke, it was in a voice that resonated with authority. "We have saved your people," the Deathworlder said, his tone cold yet somehow understanding. "But know this, our intervention comes with a price. You are not free from the conflict you once feared." The Viridionians exchanged nervous glances. The elder stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "We are forever grateful for your help, but we do not understand. What is the price of your aid? We have nothing to offer you." The Deathworlders' gaze did not soften. "You misunderstand. We do not seek wealth or material goods. What we seek is far more valuable, your loyalty." The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The Viridionians were stunned. Loyalty. What did that even mean in this context? They had been saved, but now they were being asked to give something in return that was not tangible. Something far more dangerous. The elder's voice trembled as he spoke. "Loyalty? To whom? To you? To your kind?" The Deathworlder nodded, his armored form casting a long shadow. "To us. You will remain under our protection, but in return you will fight when we ask. You will defend our interests, and you will never oppose us. The galaxy is not as peaceful as you think. You will need to stand with us, or risk facing annihilation." The Viridionians were silent. The weight of the decision was too much to bear in that moment. They had been saved, yes, but at the cost of their autonomy. Could they really agree to such terms? Would they allow their entire future to be dictated by these fearsome, powerful beings? Elder Sar looked to his people. Some were afraid, others were uncertain, but all of them understood the gravity of the situation. To refuse the Deathworlders could mean destruction. To accept meant surrendering their freedom. There was no easy answer. I need time," the elder said quietly, his voice barely audible. "This is too much for us to decide in a moment." The Deathworlder who had spoken nodded. "You have time, but not much. The galaxy is full of enemies who would gladly destroy you. We will wait for your decision. And remember this, what we offer is protection. What we take is your loyalty." As the Deathworlders retreated back to their ship, the people of Viridian stood frozen, caught in the silence of the moment. Their once peaceful world had been saved by unimaginable power, but it had come with a price that none of them were prepared to pay. The Deathworlders were not just saviors. They were conquerors, and the galaxy they knew was about to change forever. This third part further explores the consequences of the Deathworlders' intervention. The Viridionians are faced with a difficult decision: accept the Deathworlders' protection at the cost of their freedom, or risk being destroyed by other threats in the galaxy. The story builds tension by presenting a moral dilemma, keeping the audience on edge, unsure of what choice the Viridionians will make. The use of simple and clear language ensures that the audience remains engaged while the stakes continue to rise. The shifting balance of power. The days following the Deathworlders' arrival were filled with confusion and debate. Elder Sar gathered the leaders of the Viridionian clans in a large circular hall. The room was heavy with silence, as each individual struggled to comprehend the enormity of the choice before them. Outside the hall, the Deathworlders' massive ships loomed over the city, a constant reminder of their power. The people of Viridian had seen their technology, felt the weight of their intervention, and now they could not ignore the undeniable truth. They were at the mercy of beings far beyond their understanding. But at what cost? Elder Sar stood at the head of the table, his weathered face tired but resolute. "We owe our lives to them," he said quietly, "but we are not cattle to be herded. We cannot simply surrender our freedom without a second thought." A younger leader, Jara, stood up quickly. "And what choice do we have? They saved us from destruction. Without them, we would have been wiped out, along with everything we hold dear." Her voice was sharp, filled with a mix of gratitude and fear. "We must accept their offer. There is no other way." Elder Sar shook his head. "I disagree, Jara. The Deathworlders gave us no option to refuse. They offer protection in exchange for loyalty. But what is loyalty? Is it worth losing ourselves to their will?" The room grew tense as the debate continued. Some leaders were adamant that aligning with the Deathworlders was the only way to ensure survival, while others, like Elder Sar, feared the consequences of becoming subjugated to a force that cared little for Viridionian autonomy. Jara's voice cut through the murmurs. "We can't keep pretending we have a choice. If we refuse them, it won't just be the Deathworlders we face. The galaxy is full of predators, and without their protection, we will fall." A silence fell over the room. It was true. The galaxy was not a peaceful place, and Viridian, though peaceful, had no defenses to speak of. The Eligar had been only one of many threats that loomed on the horizon. Without the Deathworlders, Viridian would be a prime target for any force seeking to expand its power. The harsh reality was clear, and yet, Elder Sar couldn't shake the feeling that the cost of surrendering to the Deathworlders' protection was far too high. Before anyone could speak again, the sound of metal footsteps echoed from outside the hall. The doors opened, and the Deathworlder leader, the one who had spoken to the Elder before, entered the room. His presence was as imposing as ever, but there was something different in his posture this time. His gaze was steady, unwavering, as though he had already made up his mind about the outcome. "We've waited long enough," the Deathworlder said. "Your decision is critical. The galaxy is filled with threats that will destroy you if you do not stand with us. We are offering you survival. We are offering you protection. Do you accept?" The weight of his words pressed down on the room like a physical force. The Viridionian leaders exchanged nervous glances, their eyes darting between each other. It was clear that no one was ready to make a decision, but they had no more time. The Deathworlders were not known for their patience. Elder Sar finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "We understand your offer," he said, "and we know what you can do. But we cannot make a decision in haste. You are asking us to give up more than we can understand right now. We need more time to consider." The Deathworlder leader stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The tension in the room thickened. Then, without a word, he turned and left, his heavy footsteps retreating into the distance. As the door closed behind him, the room was left in silence once more. Elder Sar knew that the clock was ticking. The Deathworlders would not wait forever, and every moment they delayed made the price of their protection rise higher. There was no way to know what the future would bring. But one thing was clear. Viridian's fate was no longer in its own hands. The reckoning decision. The next day, the air was thick with uncertainty. The Viridionian Council had been reconvened, and this time, the weight of the decision was heavier than ever before. The Deathworlders had made their intentions clear: either join their power and survive, or face destruction. There was no middle ground. Elder Sar had spent the night pondering the situation. He had spoken to the other leaders, to the elders, and even to the common folk. What was at stake wasn't just survival. It was identity. The Viridionians had lived in peace for centuries, their society built on harmony, but now they were being asked to choose between their way of life and the cold, hard truth of survival in a galaxy teeming with dangers. Jara stood by the window, gazing out at the distant ships. She could feel the trembling fear in the hearts of her people, but it was her own heart that thudded in her chest. Was there truly another option? The Viridionians had always been weak when it came to war, their advanced technology meant for peaceful exploration, not for fighting. The Deathworlders' offer seemed like the only way out. But even as she thought about this, a nagging doubt kept her mind unsettled. What would the price be for this protection? The Deathworlders had made it clear they didn't care for the politics of other species. Would the Viridionians lose themselves in this deal? Would they become subjugated, just another pawn in a galactic game they had no say in? Elder Sar entered the room, his steps slow and deliberate. His face was calm, but his eyes showed the storm within. "Jara," he said, his voice steady. "You've been among the people, hearing their thoughts. What are they saying?" Jara turned to him, the weight of her words pressing down on her. "They're scared, Elder. They see no choice. They think survival means giving in to the Deathworlders. But I don't know. We're giving up too much. We can't even predict what we're agreeing to." Sar nodded slowly, understanding the conflict within her. "You're right. We don't know what lies ahead. But we do know one thing. We can't keep ignoring the danger. If we don't act, we will be wiped out." She shook her head, frustration in her voice. "And then what? We'll be slaves. We'll become just another piece in their game." The Elder sighed, looking out at the massive ships that now filled the skies of Viridian. "It may be that we have no choice but to trust them. But the real question, Jara, is this: can we trust ourselves to make the right decision? Can we ensure that in the end, we don't lose what makes us Viridian?" The tension in the room thickened, and for a moment, neither spoke. There was no easy answer to this question. The fate of their world, their future, and perhaps their very souls, hung in the balance. At that moment, the door opened, and the Deathworlder commander entered. His presence filled the room, and the others fell silent. He didn't have to say anything. His imposing figure, his unwavering stance, and the power that radiated from him were enough. The decision had to be made, and time was running out. "We have waited long enough," the Deathworlder said. His voice was low, but there was an unmistakable authority in it. "You will either join us, or you will be left to the mercy of the galaxy. Our offer stands." Jara clenched her fists. Every word he spoke echoed in her mind, a reminder of how little control they had. She looked to Elder Sar, her eyes filled with uncertainty. Would he make the decision? Would he accept the Deathworlders' terms, or would he find another way? Sar looked back at her, his face a mask of quiet resolve. "We will not rush into this, Commander," he said, "but we will not be forced into a corner. We are a proud people, and we will consider your offer carefully. But know this, the future of Viridian will not be dictated by fear." The Deathworlder stood motionless for a moment, his eyes narrowing. He seemed to consider the Elder's words, but then, without a word, he turned and left, the door closing behind him with a quiet finality. As the room once again fell into silence, Jara let out a long breath. The decision still hung in the air, as uncertain as ever. They had time, but not much. The galaxy would not wait forever. The final decision. The day had arrived. The Viridionians were gathered in the Great Hall, a place that had witnessed centuries of peaceful discussions, academic debates, and celebrations of their culture. But today, the atmosphere was anything but peaceful. Tension hung thick in the air, and the normally serene halls were filled with hushed whispers and worried glances. Jara stood by the window, watching as the Deathworlder fleet loomed outside. It was hard to fathom that a species so different, so intimidating, could have such a profound impact on their future. The Viridionians had never been warriors, but the Deathworlders had made it clear that the galaxy was unforgiving, and peace alone would not ensure their survival. Jara, Elder Sar's voice broke through her thoughts. He was standing behind her, his face etched with the weight of the decision they had to make. It is time. She turned slowly, her heart racing. I know, she whispered. But what if we're wrong? What if accepting them means we lose everything we've built? Everything we are? Sar's eyes softened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder. You fear that the price may be too high, but fear alone cannot guide us. We must choose, not just for ourselves, but for future generations of Viridionians. Jara's mind raced as she reflected on his words. The future was uncertain, yes, but so was the alternative. Without the Deathworlders, they faced annihilation. With them, they would have power, protection, but at what cost? In the distance, the Deathworlder ships hung like massive, unblinking eyes, each one a constant reminder of the impossible decision ahead. The fleet wasn't just a display of strength, it was a warning. They had no more time. If the Viridionians didn't act now, they would lose everything, not just their world, but their very existence. You're right, Jara said, her voice growing stronger. We can't wait any longer. We have to do what's best for the future of Viridian, even if it means making sacrifices today. Elder Sar nodded, his face hardening with resolve. Then we have made our decision. They walked together to the central chamber, where the rest of the council awaited. The room was filled with solemn faces, each one reflecting the burden of the choice that would determine the fate of their people. The council members had been divided in the past, some arguing for resistance, others for surrender. But now, there was a quiet consensus. As they entered the chamber, the whispers died down, and all eyes turned toward them. Jara stepped forward and stood at the center, facing the council. Her heart was pounding, but she knew this was her moment. This was their moment. We have discussed this long enough, Jara began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. The Deathworlders have made their offer. They have shown us power, and they have shown us that we are not strong enough to survive alone. But we cannot ignore the cost. If we accept their protection, we risk losing our autonomy, our way of life. But if we refuse, we risk losing everything. The room was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. We have to make a choice, she continued, her gaze sweeping over the council. I believe the future of Viridian lies in unity. We may have to sacrifice part of ourselves today, but it is the only way to ensure we live to see tomorrow. We must accept the Deathworlders' offer. We accept, Jara said, her voice steady but heavy with the weight of the decision. We will fight for you, if it means our survival. The commander nodded. Wise. You will not regret this decision. But remember this. The future will not be kind to those who defy the Deathworlders. The cost of your survival will be measured in the sacrifices you make. With those words, the atmosphere in the room seemed to shift, and Jara knew that the Viridionians had stepped into a new era, one where their autonomy, their values, and their very identity were being exchanged for protection and survival. As the transport ship took them back to Viridian, Jara couldn't help but reflect on the momentous decision they had made. The alliance with the Deathworlders was now official, but the true cost would only become clear over time. They had chosen survival, but at what price? The future was uncertain, and the road ahead was paved with challenges. But for the first time in days, Jara felt a sense of certainty. They had made the best choice they could, given the circumstances. Now, They would have to face whatever came next, together.